She had almost nothing left, just $847 in her checking account. The money that kept her mother alive in the care home was a huge debt she could barely cover. And the nursing school she needed to finish? That bill was 9 days late. The pressure was already too much. But then Sarah Mitchell made one simple choice that ruined her whole world. She spoke a single word to a man who owned everything. No. This was the son of a billionaire used to getting whatever he wanted, and she denied him. Most people would have just kept quiet. They would have looked away and chosen to survive another day, sacrificing what felt right just to keep the bills paid. But Sarah was different. She had a line she would not cross. And what happened the second she drew that line? The air filled with a loud noise. A massive machine descended quickly from the sky. A helicopter landed nearby. A door opened. And in that very instant, everything about Sarah's life changed forever in ways she could never have expected. Before we begin, write your name and where in the world you are watching from in the comments below. This is the true story of a young waitress who lost every cent she had in one moment, but who found something far more important inside herself. Stay with me because what you are about to hear will force you to look closely at courage and standing up for yourself, even when powerful forces tell you to sit down and be quiet. Sarah was 23 years old, living in Chicago, and every morning felt like she was lifting a ton of bricks. You know the feeling, when you are just trying to keep your head above the water. When every dollar is important, every hour worked counts, and one small mistake can make the whole structure fall down. That was Sarah's daily reality. She worked her long shifts at Betty's Diner on the South Side. It was a simple place. The floors were always a little tacky. The coffee was usually burned and bitter. The thick smell of frying food stuck to your uniform long after you went home. But she did honest work. And for Sarah, that job was everything. Sarah was in her second year of nursing school at Chicago State, studying late into the night. She dreamed of becoming a registered nurse, wanting to work in hospice care to help families through the worst times with dignity and kindness. But her main reason for working was her mom, Dorothy. Dorothy, who used to be funny and sharp, was now slowly losing herself to Alzheimer's disease. Every single paycheck Sarah earned was divided up before she even held the cash. $300 went straight to the Riverside Care Home, the expensive place that kept Dorothy safe. $200 covered the school tuition. Whatever small amount was left had to stretch for rent, groceries, and textbooks. There was never any extra money for anything fun. No movie nights, no new shoes, never a moment to relax without counting pennies. But Sarah never complained about the struggle. Every Sunday, she went to see her mom, taking a bottle of the lavender hand cream Dorothy loved. Most days, Dorothy didn't know her own daughter. On a rare good day, Dorothy would smile and say, "My Sarah, my smart girl." On the many bad days, she would just stare at Sarah like she was a total stranger. Both kinds of visits broke Sarah's heart into pieces. At Betty's Diner, Sarah had found a small, close group of coworkers, a little family. One of them was Tommy, a skinny college kid studying theater. He loved to quote Shakespeare. And a new waitress named Rose, a girl of 17 who was painfully shy and quiet, still struggling to find the courage to meet a customer's eye. Rose needed the job just as much as Sarah did, trying to save money so she could finish high school without having to rely on her single father. This specific Tuesday evening was slow. The air conditioner in Betty's was struggling, making the vinyl booth sticky. Sarah was wiping down the counter when the door crashed open with unnecessary violence, letting in a wave of hot Chicago street noise. Jackson Ashford walked in, accompanied by 3 of his friends. All loud, slick-haired young men who looked like they were trying too hard to look like their fathers. Jackson, already half-drunk and smelling faintly of expensive cologne and cheap beer, immediately took the biggest corner booth. For Sarah, Jackson was less a customer and more a test of her resolve. He was the son of Victor Ashford, the CEO of Wellington Industries, a corporate giant that dominated the city's skyline and its political life. Jackson often came to the diner on a dare or a whim, treating the place and its staff like they were props in his personal play. Jackson enjoyed trying to make Sarah flinch, often using insulting language disguised as flirtation. She had always managed him, keeping her face neutral, remembering the number $3,800, the tuition balance due in 9 days, and the $847 balance in her savings account. She needed this job. She needed Jackson to leave her alone. But tonight, Jackson didn't look for Sarah. He saw Rose. Rose was placing a pitcher of water on the table, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes glued to the sticky floor. Jackson leaned forward, resting his chin heavily on his hand. His friends chuckled, sensing the sport was about to begin. "Hey, waitress," Jackson slurred, his voice loud enough to cut through the low rumble of the refrigerator. "Look at me when I'm talking to you. What's your name?" Rose flinched, pulling her shoulders tight. "Rose," she whispered, barely audible. "Rose," Jackson repeated, drawing the word out like a piece of chewing gum. "That's a sweet name, almost as sweet as your little face. Tell me, Rose, you got a phone? A number I can call? My friends here need to know I date the pretty ones." Rose shook her head quickly, her face flooding red with shame and panic. I don't give out my number, sir. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Jackson laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He pushed himself upright, his expensive linen shirt pulled tight across his chest. "I think you misheard me, sweetheart. I wasn't asking you a question. I was telling you what's going to happen. Give me the phone. Right now." Rose started backing away, bumping into the wall behind the booth. She had clearly rehearsed exactly what to do when a difficult customer appeared. Apologize, retreat, and ask Sarah or Tommy for help. But in this moment, under the sharp glare of Jackson Ashford, all her training evaporated. She froze, mute, gripping the edge of the water tray like a shield. Jackson was used to this reaction, the compliance, the fear. He reached across the table, his hand moving like a striking snake, and locked his fingers around Rose's wrist. His grip was instant, sharp, and possessive. "You're coming with me later, Rose," he said, his voice dropping low, promising something dangerous. "We're going to talk about that number." The sound of the cheap glass pitcher Rose had been holding hitting the greasy tile floor was sickening. The water spread out in a muddy fan, and the sudden noise seemed to break Sarah's internal circuit board. For 2 years, Sarah had walked a tightrope, balancing financial necessity against every moral instinct she had. She had swallowed insults, ignored groping glances, and kept her head down because the math of $3,800 was always louder than her conscience. But watching Rose, tiny and terrified, pinned by Jackson's casual cruelty, the numbers vanished. The fear for her mother's security, the fear of losing her education, it all became a distant, theoretical threat. The immediate physical threat against the girl standing 5 feet away was real, and it won the argument. Sarah walked toward the booth. She didn't run. She didn't shout. She walked with slow, deliberate steps, forcing a calm she absolutely did not feel into her spine. The floor squeaked under her non-slip shoes with every step. When she reached the booth, she placed both hands flat on the edge of the table, leaning slightly forward so Jackson had to look up at her. Her voice was low and even, devoid of any emotional register, almost clinical. "Let go of her, Jackson," Sarah said. Jackson blinked, startled that anyone had the gall to interrupt his performance. He tightened his grip on Rose's wrist, just slightly, to show Sarah he was still in control. Rose whimpered, a small sound like a trapped animal. "Well, look who decided to show up," Jackson smirked. "Go back to your little counter, Sarah. This isn't your business. You know the rules here, don't you? The customer is always right." Sarah's eyes did not leave his. "The customer is not right when the customer commits assault," she corrected him, making sure to use the precise legal term. The word hung in the humid air of the diner, heavy and ugly. "You are grabbing a minor and refusing to release her after she said no. That's assault. Let go of Rose now or I call the police." Her bluff was ridiculous. Calling the police on Victor Ashford's son in this part of town meant nothing but trouble for Sarah. But the calmness in her voice, the flat certainty, momentarily stunned Jackson. He looked at her, searching for the crack, the tremble of fear he usually found in service workers. He found none. He finally, abruptly, released Rose's wrist. Rose stumbled back, clutching her arm, and then ran quickly, vanishing into the back hallway near the kitchen, where Tommy was standing frozen by the fryer. Jackson's face did not just register anger. It showed complete, blazing humiliation. Being confronted in front of his friends, in a place he considered beneath him, by a woman he saw as disposable labor, was an unforgivable offense. He pushed the table away from him, the legs scraping loudly on the floor. He stood up, towering over Sarah, his chest heaving with effort. "You think you're important?" Jackson spat, his breath smelling sharp with alcohol. "You think you just saved the day? You just bought yourself a ticket out of this city, you ethical little bitch." He lowered his voice, leaning close enough that Sarah could smell the sourness on his breath. "You don't understand how this works, Sarah. You don't cross people like us. We own the street you walk on. We own the water you drink. And you are nothing. Less than nothing." He took one last step back, addressing the entire, now silent, diner. "You're done," he declared, pointing a shaking finger directly at Sarah's face. "You, this dump, everyone who works here, done. I'll make sure your stupid nursing school hears about this. I'll make sure your mother is sleeping on the street. You just lost your whole life." He nodded to his friends, and without paying, they turned and strode out, the glass door slamming shut behind them with a final, echoing crash that sealed the fate of everyone left inside. The silence that followed was immense, broken only by the low hiss of the deep fryer and the frantic, shallow breaths of Mr. Walsh, the diner manager. Mr. Walsh was not a bad man, just a weak one. He was a small, round figure, always wearing a cheap tie and smelling faintly of coffee grounds and panic. He had been hiding in the office near the storeroom during the confrontation, peering out through the glass slit. Now, as the threat walked out the door, Mr. Walsh finally emerged, shaking so violently his clipboard rattled. He shuffled over to Sarah, his eyes wide and vacant. He didn't look at her face. He stared only at the grease stain on her apron. "Sarah, Sarah, Sarah," he stammered, wringing his hands. "What have you done?" That was the Ashford account. "Wellington Industries has lunch catered here 3 times a week. You know how much money that is?" "He assaulted Rose, Mr. Walsh," Sarah said, her voice still quiet, but the emotion of the moment starting to sink its teeth into her chest. "I had to stop him. He was hurting her." Mr. Walsh waved his hand dismissively, his priority clear. "Hurt? A little roughhousing. It's a little rough when you're dealing with the elite. He was being difficult, yes. But you just called him an assaulting criminal. To his face. Do you have any idea what his father can do to us?" He stopped wringing his hands and pointed a stubby, accusatory finger at her. "The liability. The reputation. I have a family, Sarah. I have bills. We need that account. You just ruined this diner. You ruined my life." The accusation was unfair, sickeningly so, but Sarah knew what was coming. The math had returned cold and brutal. "I have to protect my business," Mr. Walsh said, his voice cracking, trying to sound authoritative but just sounding pitiful. "I don't have a choice. You're fired, Sarah. Effective immediately. Clean out your locker, give me the apron, and go. I'll mail you whatever money you have coming." Sarah stood perfectly still for a long moment, processing the finality of the words. It wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact, delivered by a coward too afraid to meet her eyes. In the span of 5 minutes, she had traded $3,800 tuition, Dorothy's comprehensive care, and her entire professional future for a teenager's physical safety. She didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. Sarah walked to the back, her body feeling strangely light, as if gravity had stopped working for her. Tommy, still pale, was holding Rose near the back exit, murmuring worriedly. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," Tommy whispered, looking sick. Rose stepped forward, her eyes wet with tears. "I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to." Sarah forced a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, I did, Rose. Take care of yourself." She went into the cramped, dark staff restroom, pulled off the stained, cheap Betty's Diner uniform, and changed into the jeans and thin t-shirt she had worn that morning. She stuffed her few belongings, a worn textbook, a cheap pen, and the lavender hand cream she planned to take to Dorothy, into her canvas bag. When she came back out, she dropped the uniform in a crumpled pile on Mr. Walsh's office floor. She walked out of the diner without looking back. Stepping onto the busy Chicago street was like entering a new world. The late summer heat pressed down, and the traffic roared around her, but Sarah felt oddly disconnected, encased in cold glass. She looked up at the towering skyscrapers downtown, knowing that somewhere up there, in the corporate suites, Victor Ashford was probably having a late dinner, unaware that his son had just destroyed the life of a nursing student over a bruised ego. The immediate relief of having done the right thing was now fading, replaced by a massive, hollow wave of pure terror. She walked block after block, trying to calculate how many shifts she had left to pay for the care home, before realizing the answer was 0. She had no job. In 9 days, the school would drop her registration. Soon after, the expensive Riverside care home would demand payment, and when she couldn't provide it, they would move Dorothy to a cheaper, lower-quality facility, or worse. Sarah found a bus bench beneath a flickering street lamp and sat down. She pulled out her phone, opened her bank app, and stared at the miserable, mocking number. $847. It was enough for 4 days, maybe 5, of rent and meager food. Then, nothing. Her entire future, the life she had planned, the safety she had sought for her mother, had been wiped out by one spoiled rich boy and one righteous refusal. She had stood up for the weak, and in doing so, she had become the weak one. As the streetlights swam slightly through the sudden, hot tears, Sarah Mitchell understood what Jackson Ashford meant. She was done. Sarah spent the rest of that night staring at the ceiling of her small studio apartment, the silence heavier than any noise. When the sun came up on Wednesday, she forced herself into action. Despair was a luxury she could not afford. She had to find work. The first day was a blur of frantic hope and quick disappointment. She started online, applying for every serving, delivery, or administrative job she could find in the surrounding 5-mile radius. She crafted polite, professional emails, carefully omitting her time at Betty's Diner entirely, deciding it was better to have a gap than a liability. By noon, she realized the digital route was too slow. She put on her lease-stained jacket and hit the streets. She walked straight into places that had help wanted signs taped to their windows. A bakery down the street needed counterstaff. The manager, a kind-looking woman named Elena, seemed impressed by Sarah's nursing background and reliable work history. They spoke for 10 minutes, discussing scheduling and pay. Elena even handed Sarah a uniform t-shirt. "Just need to run a quick background check. Standard stuff," Elena said, smiling warmly. "Should only take an hour. Why don't you come back around 2? We can start training tonight." Sarah left the bakery feeling the first flicker of hope since Tuesday night. She was early, so she stopped at a small coffee shop to wait, pulling out her laptop to research Dorothy's medication schedule. At 2:05 p.m., she walked back into the bakery. Elena was wiping down the counter, but her smile was gone, replaced by a strained look of discomfort. "Sarah, come back here for a minute," Elena murmured, pulling her aside near the flour sacks. Elena's voice was low, almost apologetic. "Look, I'm really sorry about this. We filled the position. Immediately. Someone came in just after you left, and they were ready to start right now. I wish I could help, but we just can't." The lie was so thin, Sarah could practically see through it. Elena wouldn't meet her eye. Sarah's heart sank, a heavy stone dropping into her stomach. "I was here before too, Elena. You handed me the shirt." Elena sighed, looking frustrated, not with Sarah, but with some invisible pressure. "Look, honey, Chicago is a small town when you work service. Some people are very protective of their accounts and they talk. I just can't risk that kind of trouble over a part-time counter shift. I'm sorry. Go find work somewhere quiet, far away from downtown." Sarah put the t-shirt down on the counter and walked out into the cold afternoon air, the faint scent of fresh bread mocking her empty promise. That was the pattern for the next 48 hours. Every interview started well, with managers recognizing her honest ethic and need for steady income. Every follow-up call, or every attempt to check the status of her application, ended the same way. A sudden, cold rejection, a mumbled excuse about staff restructuring, or simply a voicemail that never returned her call. Jackson Ashford hadn't needed to sue her. He just needed to make a few quiet phone calls, or perhaps just let the story spread through the tight network of Southside businesses that catered to the rich on the waterfront. The waitress who stood up to an Ashford was poisoned goods. By Friday afternoon, Sarah was exhausted, running on stale bread and fear. She had applied for 61 jobs and received 0 positive responses. She hadn't been blacklisted. She had been vaporized. She returned to her apartment, the air heavy with the smell of the damp, old carpet. She checked her mailbox. It was thin, containing only junk mail and one standard white envelope addressed to her from the School of Nursing. She knew before she opened it what it was. The paper inside was thin and stark. It was an official overdue notice. Account balance due, $3,800. 00. Payment deadline, 9 days, 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, September 24th. Failure to pay will result in automatic withdrawal from all classes and forfeiture of all accumulated credit hours. Re-enrollment is subject to full repayment of all outstanding fees. Sarah slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, the rough texture of the wall scraping against her cheap sweater. Forfeiture of all accumulated credit hours. That meant 2 years of relentless work, missed sleep, and endless debt had been for nothing. It wasn't just losing the semester, it was losing the whole path. She could feel the walls of her tiny life closing in, squeezing the air out of her chest. Dorothy's care home was due in 2 days. The tuition was due in 9. She had $812 left. It wasn't enough for either. She buried her face in her knees, waiting for the tears that wouldn't come. She felt hollowed out, empty of even the energy required for panic. This was it. The total, crushing failure she had worked so hard to avoid. Jackson Ashford had won. She stayed there in the fading light for perhaps an hour, wrapped in the cold blanket of defeat. The apartment was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic. Then, there was a sound that broke the silence. A whisper of motion directly outside her door. It wasn't a knock, or the noisy clatter of the mail slot. It was the precise, expensive sound of footsteps stopping directly on her welcome mat, followed by a slight hiss as something firm and heavy slid underneath the door gap, scraping briefly against the wooden floor inside. Sarah didn't move for a full minute. Landlords didn't hand-deliver notes. Debt collectors didn't wait quietly. She finally pushed herself up and shuffled over. Lying just inside the apartment was an envelope. It was not a standard size. It was thick, heavy, and a deep, luxurious cream color, the kind of paper that felt like cotton. There was no address printed on it. Only her name, Sarah Mitchell, written in elegant, precise script with dark, expensive ink. It smelled faintly of expensive leather and paper. She picked it up. It didn't feel like a letter. It felt like a small book. It wasn't sealed with adhesive. A heavy wax seal pressed into the back held the flap closed, featuring a detailed, stylized W. The unmistakable corporate logo of Wellington Industries. Her first thought was fear. This was a subpoena. A lawsuit demanding exorbitant damages for defamation or emotional distress. Jackson was making good on his promise. She tore the seal open, her hands shaking so badly she almost ripped the thick paper inside. The contents were a single sheet, thick as cardboard, engraved with the same script. It was not a legal document. It was a request. Ms. Mitchell, we require your presence for a mandatory discussion regarding the recent events at Betty's Diner and the subsequent termination of your employment. This is not a matter of litigation. This is strictly a business meeting. You will meet my executive assistant, Ms. Catherine Porter, at 7 a.m. sharp on Saturday morning, outside the back entrance of Betty's Diner, 2104 South Michigan Avenue. Please confirm your attendance via the private cellular number listed below. Failure to respond will be viewed as a rejection of a final opportunity. Victor Ashford, CEO. The note was utterly devoid of emotion, a command disguised as an invitation. Sarah stared at the name. Victor Ashford. Not Jackson, the son who hated her, but the father, the billionaire, the man who owned everything his son touched. The meeting was happening where the destruction began. Betty's diner. Dread pooled in Sarah's stomach. Why would the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, a man who could crush her with a single legal brief, waste his time on a personal meeting with a fired waitress? The only logical answer was that he wanted to look her in the eye while he orchestrated her total destruction, perhaps offering a small, insulting severance in exchange for signing away her right to ever speak about his son. She walked to her kitchen counter, placing the thick paper next to the thin, terrible overdue notice. The two papers represented the opposite ends of the economic spectrum. One, the symbol of absolute poverty and failure. The other, the symbol of absolute power. She picked up her cheap phone. She had just hit rock bottom. She had no job, her mother was about to be evicted from the care home, and her education was about to disappear. She was already ruined. What did she have left to lose? Sarah pressed the numbers listed at the bottom of the invitation. The phone was answered instantly on the first ring by a cool, practiced female voice. You have reached the private line of Mr. Victor Ashford. Please state your name and intention. This is Sarah Mitchell, she said, her voice surprisingly steady. Tell Mr. Ashford that I will be there at 7 o'clock sharp. 7 o'clock arrived, dark and cold, cutting through the thin air of early October. Sarah dressed in the nicest clothes she owned. A dark, slightly faded pencil skirt and a cream blouse, ironed crisp despite the deep fatigue she felt. She left her tiny apartment with the resignation of a condemned person reporting to the gallows. She was walking into the Wellington Tower to finalize her own destruction, but she would meet the billionaire with her chin up. She waited outside Betty's diner, the location requested in the note. The streetlights cast a dull, yellow glow over the peeling paint of the building. Exactly at 7, a sleek black sedan, the kind that cost more than Sarah earned in 5 years, slid silently to the curb. The back door opened. A woman stepped out, immediately radiating an aura of cold competence. This was Catherine Porter, Victor Ashford's executive assistant. She wore a tailored suit the color of charcoal, and her face was unreadable, framed by a perfectly neat blonde bob. She glanced at the diner sign with obvious distaste, then fixed her eyes on Sarah. Miss Mitchell. Catherine's voice was low and precise, devoid of warmth. Yes, you must be Miss Porter. Get in the car. Mr. Ashford does not tolerate tardiness. Catherine did not offer a handshake or a smile. She simply held the door open, treating Sarah more like a package to be delivered than a human being. The car smelled faintly of leather and expensive polish. Sarah slid onto the heated seat, feeling utterly out of place. Catherine sat beside her, pulled a slim silver tablet from her bag, and began tapping, ignoring Sarah completely. Where are we going, Miss Porter? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Catherine didn't look up. Mr. Ashford found it impractical to meet you in a public place, given the nature of the misunderstanding. We are proceeding to a private location. The drive was fast and silent. They didn't head toward the downtown law offices or the financial district Sarah had expected. Instead, they drove south, past the industrial zones and shipping yards, until the car turned abruptly into a fenced-off, private area marked with small, unreadable aviation signs. The car stopped next to a large, unmarked hangar. The air was loud here, filled with the constant drone of engines and the smell of fuel. Catherine finally put down her tablet. Mr. Ashford requires efficiency. He is waiting. The hangar door rolled open with a heavy metallic groan, revealing a small, pristine airfield bathed in bright overhead lights. And in the center of the tarmac, waiting, was a sleek, silver helicopter. Sarah felt her stomach drop. This was not a meeting. This was an extraction. Her breath caught in her throat. She had expected a conference room, maybe aggressive lawyers, not a private aircraft. The sheer, casual expense of the gesture felt like a physical blow. A helicopter? Sarah managed. Yes, it is quicker. Catherine stated simply, opening her door. "Follow me, please." Sarah followed, her worn shoes scuffing slightly on the polished concrete of the hangar floor. The helicopter blades were already spinning slowly, creating a heavy, rhythmic thumping sound that vibrated through her chest. A pilot in a clean uniform was waiting by the door. "Ready." Catherine handed Sarah a noise-dampening headset and gestured for her to climb aboard. As Sarah settled into the leather seat, the pilot gave a quick thumbs up, and the engine roared to life. The acceleration was sudden and intense. Sarah pressed back into the seat as the world tilted violently. The ground fell away, and the airport lights shrunk to pinpricks. Within seconds, they were above the industrial sprawl, heading back north, skimming the clouds toward the glittering core of the city. This was the view Jackson Ashford saw every day. The city Sarah fought tooth and nail to survive in was suddenly laid out beneath her like a complex, glittering map. Unreal, distant, beautiful, and utterly merciless. The distance separating her and the Ashford family was not just financial. It was physical, symbolized by the thin layer of pressurized air keeping her alive 2,000 feet in the sky. The pilot banked sharply, and the glass skyscraper of Wellington Industries, dominating the lakefront, rushed toward them. Sarah could see the tiny landing pad painted clearly on the top floor, Victor Ashford's private entrance. The landing was smooth, almost silent, followed by the dull roar of the rotors slowing down. Catherine opened the door into a luxurious rooftop reception area, walled entirely in thick glass that offered an uninterrupted, dizzying view of Lake Michigan. "Wait here," Catherine instructed, pointing to a seating area of dark, expensive furniture. Sarah waited for 5 minutes, the silence in the high space intense after the engine noise. The only sounds were the soft chime of a water feature in the corner and the barely audible rush of the ventilation system. Then, a heavy, dark wood door opened, and Victor Ashford walked out. He was shorter than Sarah had expected, but incredibly dense, built like a tank in a tailored suit. He had iron-gray hair, a sharp, unsmiling face, and eyes that were the color of cold, polished granite. He didn't look like a greedy villain. He looked like a general, someone who made decisions that affected thousands of lives and rarely regretted them. He didn't offer a hand. He merely gestured toward a large, round table made of dark marble, clearly built for negotiations. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for making the time to attend," Victor said. His voice was deep, cultured, and carried the weight of absolute authority. Sarah stood, pulling her shoulders back. "Mr. Ashford, I came because I knew you would find me anyway." Victor gave a tight, humorless smile. "A frank assessment. Good. Sit down." Sarah took a seat. Victor sat opposite her, placing his hands flat on the polished table. "Let's bypass the pleasantries and the legal posturing. You believe you are here to receive a cease and desist order or possibly a lawsuit for defamation. Stemming from your interaction with my son, Jackson, at Betty's Diner," Victor began, his gaze unwavering. "I believe I am here to finalize the consequences of protecting a coworker from assault," Sarah corrected calmly. Victor nodded slowly, a slight tilt of the head acknowledging her precision. "Assault. An accurate description. I have reviewed the security footage. Every second of it. I also heard Mr. Walsh fire you, prioritizing the welfare of my corporation over the safety of his staff." Sarah felt a surge of cold dread. He had watched it all. "You've been thorough," Sarah stated, trying to keep the accusation out of her tone. "Thoroughness is how businesses worth billions operate, Miss Mitchell. I didn't stop with the footage. When a person steps in front of a powerful force, risking their future for a moral principle, I want to know everything about them." Victor leaned forward slightly. "I know your current bank balance. $847. I know your tuition for the Chicago School of Nursing is due in 9 days. I know your mother, Dorothy Mitchell, is a resident at the Riverside Care Home, and that you visit her 3 times a week, despite working 60 hours and studying full-time. I know that you have consistently declined welfare and government aid, insisting on paying for your mother's care yourself, even though it strips you bare." Sarah felt a burning sensation behind her eyes, fighting the urge to cry. Her entire life, reduced to a dossier in front of this man. It felt like an invasion, but also strangely relieving. There were no secrets left to protect. "So you know exactly how much you destroyed when you had me fired," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Victor did not flinch. "I had nothing to do with Mr. Walsh's cowardly decision. But yes, I recognize the destruction caused." He paused, letting the statement hang. This was the moment Sarah expected the cruel joke, the final victory lap. But what Victor said next fractured all her expectations. "But you are wrong about why you are here," Victor stated firmly. "I did not bring you here to punish you further. I brought you here because I admire you, Miss Mitchell. Your actions were an investment." Sarah blinked, confused. "An investment? In what?" "In integrity, a quality that cannot be bought or taught. You had every reason to stay silent. Self-preservation demanded it. But you stood up. You assessed the situation instantly, defined the aggression clearly, assault, and acted. That is rare, Miss Mitchell. Highly rare." Victor's gaze intensified. "My son Jackson, on the other hand, is not an asset. He is a liability. An entitled child who believes money exempts him from the laws of civilized behavior." Sarah was stunned. She had expected him to defend Jackson, to rationalize his abuse. "I don't understand," she whispered. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know that your courage did not go unrewarded," Victor continued, his tone turning utterly pragmatic. "Jackson's behavior has been a problem for years. Your footage, your clear moral stance, was the final evidence I needed to sever his financial lifeline. I cannot tolerate loose ends or reputation risks in my organization, even when they carry my name." He looked directly at her. "As of 2 days ago, Jackson Ashford's trust fund is frozen, completely inaccessible. His credit cards have been canceled. His apartment lease has been terminated. He is no longer living in Chicago." Sarah stared, speechless. "Jackson, the entitled prince, was cut off? What did you do to him?" she finally managed to ask. Victor lifted an eyebrow. "I sent him to work, Miss Mitchell. He is currently an entry-level hourly employee at one of Wellington's remote industrial facilities in central Montana. He will be sweeping floors and working a cash register, earning minimum wage. He will remain there until he understands that value is earned, not inherited." You stripped him of everything?" Sarah murmured, feeling a strange mix of shock and dizzying satisfaction. "I gave him an opportunity to grow up or fail trying," Victor corrected coolly. "A costly lesson, but one necessary for the future of the Ashford name. Now, let's discuss your opportunity. You see, I am not a sentimental man. I only invest in things that yield a return." Victor leaned back, the hard lines of his face softening ever so slightly, indicating the transition from condemnation to calculation. "You have demonstrated clarity, courage, and uncompromising ethics. In other words, exactly the qualities I seek in a business leader. When Mr. Walsh fired you, he created a vacancy. I intend to fill that vacancy with the right candidate, and I believe that candidate is you. I have already taken care of the first item on your immediate needs list," Victor stated, his voice flat, devoid of triumphant flair. He gestured toward a sleek silver briefcase resting on the glass table. "I required a stable, controlled environment for my investment. Betty's Diner as an asset was too volatile under Mr. Walsh's management. As of 3 a.m. this morning, Wellington Industries acquired the property. The leasehold is terminated. The property is ours." Sarah stared at him, unable to process the scale of the transaction. The thought of the old, greasy diner belonging to the man sitting across from her was absurd. It was like putting a diamond ring on a garbage dump. "You bought the diner?" Sarah asked, the words catching in her throat. "I bought the property, the business license, and the assets, which included the termination of Mr. Walsh's contract," Victor confirmed, nodding once. "That brings us to you. I am offering you the position of general manager of Betty's Diner, effective immediately. Your starting salary will be $75,000 annually, plus a performance bonus structure we can finalize later. I expect you to stabilize the operation, restore order, and begin the process of necessary upgrades. Do we agree on this initial point? Sarah gripped the edges of the heavy leather armchair. $75,000. That number was 4 times what she scraped together waiting tables and tutoring. It was enough to stop the panic, enough to pay the tuition, enough to keep Riverside Care Home from calling her every hour. She swallowed hard, fighting the surge of dizzy relief. That is a massive amount of money for a diner manager, Mr. Ashford. It is fair compensation for securing my asset and demonstrating the moral backbone my organization desperately requires. Victor corrected, refusing the notion of charity. But I know that salary alone, even at that level, only solves half your problem. Your concentration is currently split between your education, your job, and your mother's failing health and insufficient care. I need you focused on the job I am hiring you for. Victor paused, letting his words land like stones. He opened the silver briefcase. Inside, Sarah could see several thick manila folders, each neatly labeled in precise handwriting. The second part of the agreement covers the rest of your immediate financial distress, Victor continued. The $3,800 due for your nursing school tuition will be wired directly to the university accounts this afternoon. That burden is removed. More importantly, I have examined the details of your mother's placement at Riverside Care Home. It is inadequate. She is not receiving the level of focused, specialized attention her condition requires, nor the dignity she deserves. The air in the luxurious office felt suddenly thin. Sarah's careful composure, which she had maintained through the harassment, the firing, the job hunt, and the intimidating helicopter ride, began to splinter. Wellington Industries assumes full financial responsibility for Dorothy Mitchell's care. Indefinitely, Victor announced, his gaze unwavering. I have already secured a specialized placement for her at Lakeside Manor. It is the finest facility in the state, offering high-level, dedicated neurological and compassionate care. She will be transferred there tomorrow morning, should you agree to these terms. The mention of Lakeside Manor was like a physical blow. Sarah knew the name. It was the place she drove past sometimes. A grand, quiet building set against the lake, always looking impossibly clean and peaceful. A building reserved for the wealthy and the connected. She had never let herself imagine her mother there. To admit that desire felt like admitting a weakness, a luxury she couldn't afford. Tears, hot and stinging, pushed against her eyes. This was not about money anymore. This was about the years of guilt over the cheap, inadequate care her mother was receiving. This was the crushing weight that had pressed down on her chest since her mother's diagnosis. Sarah tried to speak, but only a choked sound escaped her throat. She gripped her knees, trying to hold her trembling body still. Victor watched her reaction without pity, but also without cruelty. He was observing data. This arrangement is not philanthropy, Sarah, he stressed firmly. It is a necessary investment in your future performance. If you are worried sick about your mother every minute of the day, you will be a terrible employee. I eliminate the anxiety. I expect focused results in return. Do you understand the second term of the agreement? Sarah could only nod, finally managing to wipe a thick tear that ran down her cheek and onto the leather of the chair. The relief was so absolute, so overwhelming, that it felt like pain. And the third item, Victor said, moving past her emotional collapse as if it were a necessary administrative hurdle. My ultimate plan is not to have you managing a small, refurbished diner indefinitely. You are still pursuing a degree in nursing. I ran background checks on your academic performance. You are an exceptional student, specializing in complex patient care and administrative health systems. Victor closed the briefcase with a soft, decisive click. Upon your graduation, provided you maintain your academic standing and the diner operation is running smoothly, you will transition into a leadership position within Wellington Industries. You will manage employee health and wellness programs across the corporation. Your empathy, combined with your fierce integrity, makes you uniquely suited to ensure my thousands of employees receive truly compassionate and ethical care. That position comes with a substantial increase in salary, full benefits, and corporate advancement opportunities. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. You will have the time, the resources, and the support to finish your nursing degree, secure your mother's future, and step into a highly influential career, all because you refused to back down when faced with a bully. This is the entire offer. Do you accept? Sarah sat perfectly still for a long moment, the vertigo receding, replaced by a sudden, profound clarity. This was a deal with the devil, perhaps, but a devil who was offering salvation, not damnation. He saw her value and her principle, and he was offering to pay for it. She would not be bought, but she could be leveraged. She looked directly into Victor Ashford's perceptive, cold eyes. I accept your terms, Mr. Ashford. Every part of them. Victor nodded, a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. Good. We begin immediately. You start reviewing the financial ledgers for Betty's Diner tomorrow. My assistant, Catherine, will handle the transfer logistics for your mother. The transition happened with a speed and efficiency that was breathtaking. The next morning, Sarah met Catherine Porter at Riverside Care Home. Sarah wore the only nice dress she owned, still slightly stunned, feeling like an imposter. The process at Riverside was usually agonizing, involving hours of paperwork and veiled threats about outstanding bills. This time, Catherine presented a single sheet of Wellington Industries letterhead. The manager, usually aggressive and demanding, turned pale, signed immediately, and did not meet Sarah's eyes once. The weight of the Ashford name, when wielded by Victor, crushed all opposition. They traveled with Dorothy to Lakeside Manor. The contrast was shocking. Riverside had smelled perpetually of disinfectant and old cooking oil, lit by harsh fluorescent tubes that cast everything in a sickly yellow-white. The staff were often overworked, stressed, and exhausted. Lakeside Manor smelled faintly of fresh-cut flowers and polished wood. The light was natural, pouring in through soaring, spotless windows overlooking a small, manicured garden. The floors were silent, carpeted in deep blue wool. Dorothy Mitchell, usually restless and agitated at Riverside, seemed immediately calmed by the tranquility of her new surroundings. A nurse, attentive, calm, and wearing tailored scrubs, greeted them by name and escorted them to a spacious private room. It was painted in soft, calming colors, not the institutional beige Sarah was used to. The bed was wide and comfortable, and the window looked out over the quiet lake. As the nurse gently helped Dorothy settle into her new armchair, Sarah realized she was watching her mother smile. A deep, genuine smile she hadn't seen in years, one that reached her eyes. It is so quiet here, Sarah, Dorothy whispered, her voice clearer than usual, momentarily overcoming the fog of the disease. It feels like home, doesn't it? Sarah knelt beside her mother, tears returning. But these were tears of pure, simple relief. For the first time since her mother's illness began, Sarah felt she had done right by her. She felt the heavy, cold anchor of guilt, fear, and debt lift completely from her spirit. The constant, visceral fear of running out of money, of failing her mother, of losing her education. It was gone, erased by the sharp, pragmatic calculation of a ruthless billionaire. Victor Ashford did not care about her feelings, but he had removed every obstacle to her peace. She spent the entire afternoon there, watching her mother eat a real meal and engage in a short, lucid conversation with the dedicated caregiver. Sarah left Lakeside Manor as the sun set, feeling an emptiness in her hands, the absence of the constant financial dread. She walked out into the cool evening air, no longer a desperate student clinging to a precarious ledge, but a woman with resources, purpose, and, finally, peace. She had traded her victimhood for a very specific and powerful kind of debt, and she was ready to work to repay it. She walked into Betty's Diner at 7 the next morning. The key felt heavy and cold in her hand, a physical representation of the massive corporate transfer that had occurred overnight. A small, laminated sign was taped hastily to the front door. Closed. Management transition in progress. She pushed the door open, the bell above the entrance failing to ring as usual. The diner smelled stale, of old grease and floor cleaner that never quite defeated the deep dirt. Tommy was wiping down the counter, moving slowly, shoulders slumped, assuming he was minutes away from cleaning out his locker forever. Rose sat silently in a booth near the kitchen, nervously twisting a paper napkin. They looked up, their faces etched with uncertainty and the lingering fear left by Mr. Walsh's cowardly departure and Jackson Ashford's cruelty. "Good morning," Sarah said, her voice clear and firm. She walked straight to the register, pulled out the cash drawer, and started counting the float. "Tommy, Rose, I need you both in this booth right now. We need to talk about the future." The two young people slid into the cracked red vinyl booth. Sarah sat across from them, folding her hands on the sticky table. There was no need for pleasantries. "Yesterday," Sarah began, "I lost my job for doing the right thing. Mr. Walsh fired me to save the Ashford account. This morning, Victor Ashford bought Betty's Diner outright. Walsh is gone. Effective immediately, I am the general manager. And the first thing I am changing is everything." Rose gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Tommy squinted, trying to process the scale of the reversal. "Victor Ashford? The billionaire?" "The billionaire," Sarah confirmed. "The account he cared about was never the diner. It was me. He made an investment, and now we all have to prove he didn't waste his money. Starting with pay. Effective immediately, your hourly wage is $25. You are both getting full benefits and a fixed schedule that respects your time." Tommy's jaw went slack. 25? But the diner can't afford that. "Wellington Industries can," Sarah countered, leaning in. "But that money isn't free. This diner needs to be run like a professional operation, not a high school play rehearsal. Tommy, you are the assistant manager. You know the schedules, you know the ordering, and you know how to talk to people. You handle operations while I am in class. Rose," Sarah turned to the quiet waitress, "you handled yourself with grace and courage the other night, even when you were terrified. I watched the tape. That strength is leadership. I need you to be the supervisor. You handle the staff training and the customer floor. You set the tone. No one treats anyone else here badly. Not staff, not customers. If someone disrespects you, you call me and they leave. Got it?" It took several hours to convince them this was real and not some elaborate, cruel joke. They spent the rest of the day cleaning and organizing. Sarah, utilizing Victor's generous financial access, immediately initiated a renovation. The greasy, yellowing walls were painted a clean, sharp white. The cracked tiles were replaced. The malfunctioning bell was fixed. New staff were hired at the new, high-wage, screened carefully for dependability. Betty's Diner became Betty's, a clean, respectful, and highly efficient hub of activity. The food remained simple and honest, but the atmosphere was completely transformed. For the next 18 months, Sarah lived a relentless, bifurcated life defined by two schedules. Her mornings and evenings belonged to Betty's Diner, ensuring the business ran smoothly and Victor's investment earned its interest. She placed enormous trust in Tommy and Rose, who blossomed under the responsibility, proving her judgment correct. Her days belonged entirely to the Chicago School of Nursing. The relief of financial solvency was not a sudden luxury. It was a profound stripping away of distraction. Before Victor's offer, every word in a textbook, every lecture on physiology, was tainted by the cold pressure of the tuition clock. Now she could simply absorb the knowledge. She studied patient history not as a means to an expensive degree, but as the essential foundation of her future career. She saw her mother thriving at Lakeside Manor, receiving the specialized care that eased her pain and occasionally brought back moments of true lucidity, and this image fueled her studies with an inexhaustible energy. She excelled. Without the need to pull 3 extra shifts a week or worry about eviction, her focus sharpened like a scalpel. She handled clinical placements with confidence, her experience managing chaos at the diner translating into quick, decisive action in the hospital environment. She devoured the coursework, earning straight A's. Her commitment was not simply academic. It was a deeply ethical response to the opportunity she had been given. The time flew past, structured by the clang of the diner bell and the quiet hum of the library air conditioner. In the spring, Sarah Mitchell graduated at the top of her class, accepting her degree with honors. The small graduation ceremony felt like a quiet miracle. Tommy and Rose were there, dressed in their clean, pressed Betty's uniforms, along with a beaming caregiver from Lakeside Manor who brought Dorothy for the brief ceremony. Sarah looked out at her mother, lucid for this precious moment, smiling weakly in the front row, and knew the price she had paid for that moral stance 2 years prior had been worth every sacrifice. But graduation was not the end. It was the next transition. Victor Ashford's investment was not philanthropic. It was strategic. The final phase of her agreement was beginning. Over the next 3 months, Sarah dedicated her non-management time to preparing for her corporate transition. Her new role as Director of Health and Wellness for Wellington Industries required more than just clinical knowledge. It required systems thinking, empathy on a mass scale, and an understanding of human resource management. Victor's executive assistant, Catherine Porter, provided Sarah with thick binders detailing Wellington's sprawling global operation and its hundreds of diverse employees, from warehouse laborers to high-level engineers. Sarah sat in her small, quiet apartment, now free of rent stress, poring over the material. She spent hours studying organizational behavior, reading case studies on employee burnout, and designing theoretical programs for stress management and preventative care. She understood that Victor didn't want a standard HR manager. He wanted a nurse with an ethical core, someone who understood how the system chewed people up. He wanted a manager who knew what desperation felt like. One evening, Rose came over to the apartment to drop off some paperwork from Betty's. She watched Sarah surrounded by graphs and flowcharts. "This looks intense, Sarah," Rose said, placing the files on the table. "I thought getting the degree was the hard part." Sarah pushed a binder aside. "The degree was about knowing how to heal the body. This is about preventing the body from breaking in the first place. This job," Sarah tapped the Wellington logo on the binder, "isn't about profit margins. It's about making sure the people working on the factory floor, the ones who are one paycheck away from disaster, get the same basic respect I demanded at the diner." "So you're taking your fight to the big leagues," Rose smiled. "I'm trying to honor the contract," Sarah corrected, her gaze steady. "Victor gave me my life back. He gave my mom a chance. He believed that integrity was worth paying for. Now I have to prove he made the right calculation. Tommy, and you can run Betty's without me. You built it into a great place. But Wellington is where the real work of compassionate systems starts." Sarah closed her last textbook, the thick cover cold under her hand. She was ready. She had navigated the poverty, survived the moral test, and delivered on the academic promise. Now, she was prepared to step into the gleaming corporate tower, not as a victim seeking justice, but as a deliberate agent of change. She had built her new foundation, brick by ethical brick, knowing that the strength of the building depended entirely on the moral courage of the moment she chose to intervene. The glass elevators of the Wellington Tower were silent, moving faster and smoother than any mechanism Sarah had ever experienced. The atmosphere was filtered and cool, smelling faintly of expensive leather and polished wood, a world away from the grease and steam of Betty's diner. Sarah stepped into her new office, which offered a sweeping, dizzying view of Lake Michigan. She was Director of Health and Wellness, a title she still had trouble saying out loud. Her focus was not on making money, but on making the workplace human. She spent the first 3 months buried in data, analyzing employee burnout, safety protocols, and access to mental health support across Wellington's massive, complex system. She understood the true cost of working while terrified of bills, and she prioritized the well-being of the lowest-paid workers, the cleaners, the security guards, the factory floor staff. Victor Ashford had given her a mandate for compassionate care, and she intended to deliver it in full. She designed programs that didn't just look good on paper but actually provided tangible relief, remembering the days she was too afraid to take a sick day. Every Saturday, Sarah left the corporate world behind for the sunlit, peaceful halls of Lakeside Manor. Dorothy was thriving. She was not cured, but she was calm, lucid often, and always beautifully cared for. The staff knew her name, knew her history, and treated her with dignity Sarah could never have afforded herself. One afternoon, Sarah sat with her mother in the garden, watching the slow movement of the clouds. Dorothy squeezed her hand. "You look rested, sweetie," she said clearly. "You finally look like you can breathe." This quiet, simple recognition was the only reward Sarah truly needed, and it settled the debt she felt she owed Victor Ashford deeper than any paycheck. 6 months into her new role, the weight of the past felt impossibly distant. Sarah drove out to Wellington's massive suburban distribution center, far from the central tower. She was there to conduct a surprise audit of the employee health station and review scheduling compliance for the night shift workers. The air inside the hangar-like building was thick with the mechanical grinding of machinery and the clean, acrid smell of shipping tape and corrugated cardboard. She walked the floor with the site supervisor, discussing stress points in the workflow. As they turned a corner near the loading docks, Sarah stopped dead. He was there, Jackson Ashford. He was pushing a heavy metal dolly piled high with boxes. He was dressed in the standard drab gray uniform of a general hourly employee, the same uniform worn by hundreds of others around him. The tailored silk shirts and expensive watches were gone. He looked smaller, diminished by the massive scale of the warehouse and the sheer effort of the work. His face was streaked with sweat, and the perpetual, arrogant sneer that used to define him was replaced by a look of dull, exhausted concentration. He was just a worker hauling boxes. Jackson looked up, wiping his forehead with the back of his gloved hand. His eyes locked onto Sarah's. The shock was immediate and brutal on his face. The brief flash of hatred she expected ignited. But then, under the sheer weight of his present reality, it collapsed into a profound, gut-wrenching shame. Sarah felt nothing rush toward her. No adrenaline, no triumph, no desire for retribution. She was simply observing an employee. She gave him a single, professional nod. It was brief, polite, and totally impersonal, the quiet acknowledgement a manager gives any worker doing their required task. It was not forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't a gloat. It was closure. She walked past him without breaking her stride, continuing her conversation with the site supervisor about ventilation standards. Jackson didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply stared down at the gray concrete floor, his shame thick and palpable, before forcing the heavy dolly forward, resuming his punishing labor. The heavy, cold lump that had lived in Sarah's chest for years, the constant low-level terror of failure and poverty, finally melted away. Victor Ashford had kept his promise. He had not only ensured Jackson faced a consequence, he had forced him to earn his life back the honest way. Sarah finished her audit, signed the forms, and left the warehouse. Her career was established, meaningful, and secure. Her mother was safe, happy, and receiving the finest care possible. She had completed her nursing degree, graduating with high honors, and now she had the power to protect others within the system that had almost crushed her. She realized, with a profound sense of peace, that the integrity she had chosen in that desperate moment at the diner, the choice to stand up for Rose even when she knew it would cost her everything, had not resulted in her destruction. It had been the price of her true freedom. Her life was no longer about survival. It was about intention. She had chosen her path, not had it forced upon her, and the foundation of her entire future was built on that single act of moral courage. Now we want to know what you thought. From 0 to 10, what score does this story deserve?